Hey, Tim.
Hey, how are you?
I have to tell you, Tim, I am so in love with Spinning Gold. I am I
Oh,
am crazy about this film. I talked with Byron last week and was just gaga with him talking about all the visual tonal bandwidth and the visuals and covering 3 decades, and now I get to talk with you, the creator of all of this. But boy, oh boy, I wanted the film to be longer, in all honesty.
thank you for that. Well, by the way, there could have been probably another 10 hours. There was a lot of story to figure out what to boil it down to.
Well, not just with story, but the needle drops, the songs. My God.
Yeah, I did have quite a hand up in the fact that the music is just so great. It's just some of the best there ever was.
I know. And, like I told Byron, I said, let me tell you, I still have all of my original albums and singles from when all of this music came out back in the 70s. All of my original Casablanca albums have transported it across the country with me from when I was buying this stuff in high school. Still has stickers on it from We Three Records in the Plymouth Meeting Mall. Are you kidding me? The music is just amazing, and all I could think of is, oh my, how difficult was it to narrow down your needle drops?
It was so difficult. There was a long period of time where we actually, right after shooting, we had quite a bit of the Cameo Records era as well.
Mm-hmm.
He actually started, of course, with MGM Records, so you had we did obviously have Willie Bully in there, but he had so many hits during that period of time. And then going to Cameo Parkway, and then Buddha, and then Casablanca, it was extremely hard. Ultimately, we really looked at what songs served the story. I mean, it was very important to us from the very beginning that it not be the kind of film where you got up to one of these great songs and then you just stopped and just listened to those songs. Because as wonderful as they are, I always find in those kind of music films that the narrative tends to stop when it's just giving way to performance. And so what we really were searching for were songs that informed the narrative, songs that informed the characters. And once we did that, things like Death, that really was originally written for Peter Chris's wife, but then they did change the name to be my father's wife, my mother. So suddenly Death, of course, became consequential. When you're in such a hardship moment, the idea of Lean on Me, like those songs, when they were written, were very important narrative songs. Mm-hmm. And so for us, it really became just about what songs served the story ultimately. But even then, right up until the end of production, we still had planned to shoot a whole Curtis Mayfield section.
Oh, wow.
And we were going to do Superfly, and we were going to do a couple others, and it just ultimately became, to quote the great Amadeus, too many notes. Tried to limit.
What was it that prompted you to go on this journey to tell your dad's story? I mean, his story is fascinating, and anybody who is old enough to have followed his career and the various labels that he founded and or worked with over the years, as I did, I knew a lot about your dad just from watching all of his appearances and interviews and keeping up with all that stuff back in the day. But for you, what prompted you to tell this story, which is now going to be so new to, I say, 90% of the audience out there?
I think that's right. He was such a, it sounds like a silly statement because it seems a little bit obvious, but he was such a larger-than-life character. Yes, for music, but just in our lives as a father, he was just this extraordinary force. When he passed away, it happened so quickly. We were really unaware of his illness, frankly, until almost the very end. And so he suddenly had this gigantic hole ripped away. And I think as any child, I was 12 at the time, as any child who loses such a significant force in their life, there becomes a fascination to understand, what degree of haunting you now have by this character that, you only kind of knew. So my fascination with him really started as a son who lost a father, and he was just interested in who that father was. That said, very quickly, maybe almost too quickly, it was maybe only a couple years when people started knocking on the door about the Broadway rights or the movie rights, and I think it was too raw for the family. We really weren't interested in doing anything at that time. But those questions kept coming through the years, and as I started into the business and started doing film and television, it suddenly dawned on me, I had the greatest story that was just gifted to me. Yes, he happened to be my father, but forget that. What a great character! What an implausible and improbable meteoric rise success story. And so, as a storyteller, I suddenly found myself gifted with this extraordinary story that, luckily, because I happened to have been his son, I was in a unique position to try to tell. I didn't intend to direct it early on. I always thought maybe that was too close. But I did think I was perhaps uniquely capable of finding out the truth about him as a writer. And so really it began really for me as a writer and as a producer. And I would say for a good chunk of time, maybe a decade, one of my most important jobs was just saying no to people trying to get the rights. But ultimately in 1999, we finally set it up at a studio for the first time. And at that point, it became great. So we've now set this up. I guess I now have to take it more seriously. I've been talking about it for years, just in the context of, let me tell you some wonderful stories about my dad. Let me tell you the greatest hits about my father's life. And suddenly I had to actually write it. And so I then embarked on this incredible journey that any child should be blessed to have, which was a forensic investigation of who my father was. And so many people opened up their hearts and souls to tell me incredible stories about what he meant to them. And I mean from the Clive Davises to the Donna Summers and everyone in between, everybody opened up their hearts to tell me what he meant to them, what he meant to music. And the more I learned and the crazier the stories revealed themselves to be, the more clear it was to me that I just had this incredible story to tell. And as a storyteller, how could I not?
In talking with all of these other people who opened up to you about your dad, Tim, what was the most surprising thing that you learned or discovered about him?
I think the most surprising thing for me was just how close to disaster he always was. As a 12-year-old when he died, although I spent so much time with him, even though I was quite young, he really was an incredible clear force. I feel like I did know the essence of him. But I knew him as the success. I knew him as the guy who had created this incredible label. I mean, when Casablanca really explodes, it's 1977, so I'm 7 years old. So my formative years with him, it was a miraculous success. And I think, like, hopefully, most people who see this movie will walk into it and go, well, Kiss, of course, they were a success. And Donna Summer, of course, she was a success. None of that was true. And how close he was to constant disaster and the incredible, frankly, balls he had to just keep betting on himself, that I did not know. I knew about his force of nature. I knew how people just loved this man and they gravitated towards him. I didn't know how dangerous his life was to constant disaster. I didn't know how deeply he was involved in the mob. I didn't know how on a daily basis he was on the verge of bankruptcy. So that to me was quite surprising in that he put on a show even for us as family ultimately. Everybody just saw what he wanted us to see. I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah, a lot of that stuff was like revelatory. It really was.
Revolutionary, absolutely. I mean, I always love, whenever somebody thinks about Love to Love You Baby, they just assume that must have been a smash. but for that, I mean, I do the scene in the movie, and it really was that scene, and maybe I shouldn't have been in that party. Maybe my parents shouldn't have let me, but I was. That's what happened. This song came out and flopped and was forgotten about, and someone accidentally put it on at a party years later. But for that, there's no Donna Summer. But for that, there's no disco. That stuff I don't think people know. I also don't think people know one of the things I love so much, and I always kind of talk about the film as, or the story rather, it really was the island of misfit toys. Neil Bogart was Neil Bogart of the Brooklyn Projects. Gene Simmons was Chaim Witz, and Paul Simon was Stanley Eisen, and Donna Summer was Donna Gaines, and Bill Withers was installing toilet seats on airplanes. None of these people should have succeeded, and somehow they found each other, and as a result of that, this fairy tale happened. It was, I think, a revelation for anyone who loves these songs but have no idea where the artists actually came from who ultimately created them.
Mm-hmm. Now, at what point did you decide that you were going to tackle this story as a director? Because this is where your talents just explode, Tim. Explode.
Okay. Thank you. It was very late in the game. I, as a writer, crafted the first draft, a very long first draft, 180 pages, pretty early after 1999. And then we went through a whole host of potential stars to play him, potential directors. And every time we would work with another director, when I was at one studio, then another studio, we would keep developing it further away from what the original idea was. And ultimately, the studios or the financiers at that point would come back and say, no, you need to get it back to what you originally had, Tim. So there was this connection that people seemed to have with my vision of it. And ultimately, appropriately, anytime another filmmaker came on, they wanted to make it their own. But they all seemed to be focused on different things. Certainly the sex, drugs, and rock and roll of it was attractive to people. They always loved the excess. I never thought that was the story. Not that I shied away from it. I just thought, as the character says in the film, it was sex before it was deadly. It was drugs, but it was the 70s.
Yeah.
These things were not bad things. I actually thought a lot of my father's flaws, of which he had many, were ultimately his superhero traits. If he wasn't a gambler, he would never have succeeded. If he wasn't an addict, he would never have succeeded. But every time a new filmmaker came on board, they took it in a very different direction. And it's not that we were trying to protect, like, the image of my father, because, again, as I said, I think his flaws made him most interesting. It's just that it wasn't the story that I thought audiences wanted to hear. And over the years, as a filmmaker, I was setting up other projects to direct. I just kept kind of pushing aside this one. And it was finally after I finally decided to part ways with Justin Timberlake, who was attached for a while, to play my father, because he was just way too consumed with his music at the time, and it was going to take too long, that I finally just said, it's just time, and I'm going to do what he did, which is bet on myself.
I think you made a very, very wise decision, because we learn about the industry from your father's perspective and what these artists went through to become superstars. But we learn so much about the man and who he was, and his love for his family, his love for his core group of friends who were with him and supported him in his crazy ideas. That is such a fascinating aspect. And then you build around that. The way you have structured this film visually is beyond outstanding. Your use of color, you're spanning 3 decades. You got 50s, 60s, 70s happening in here. Your hair and makeup and costuming, off the charts. Perfection. Absolute period perfection.
So many people, I have felt, when you look at these biopics, specifically in this period, I've always felt most people over-period the period. Mm-hmm. I think most projects that have been done about the 1970s look at the 70s as a joke, look at the style as a joke. But anybody who's actually there, who actually was in Studio 54, people looked great. This is where some of the best designers of our current day came from. So I think there was always an odd, kind of easy path to take to make fun of that period. And I just thought there's a reason that period has sustained. There's a reason it keeps coming back. I think the style was actually quite extraordinary. The music was clearly extraordinary. And so setting out from the design design standpoint, it was incredibly important to us to not over-period the period. Yes, people have big hair, but, not that big. And yes, the collars were wider, but not that wide. And that was a very important thing for us, was to not make it a joke, because the people who lived it, I say this in the movie in different ways, but it really is true. There's not a single person I interviewed, and again, Clive Davis, Barry Gordy, all the music acts, almost verbatim. I would start these interviews, hundreds and hundreds of hours of interviews. I would start these interviews and say, just first tell me how it felt. I just want to know what it felt like to be there at the time. And I swear almost every single one of them put the do not disturb on their phone, turned to me and said, don't know how I survived it. Don't know if I'd do it again. But that was the greatest fucking time of my life. And that became the compass of this movie. It wasn't a joke. It was the greatest time of these people's lives, which meant there was magic there. And that's really what I set out to celebrate.
You definitely do that. And you do that with your visual design, your work with Byron. The camera work is just exemplary, Tim. And the visual tonal bandwidth of the film. We have these very distinct looks happening in the film. You've got concerts happening. You've got a gospel church. You've got studio sessions. You've got the quiet, intimate moments, such as Gene Simmons and Neil on the bus, which is one of the most beautiful.
Byron, who I had the honor of doing a film right before this, and then I just finished another film with him after we did Spinning Gold. And the one thing that Byron and I will never do anything without him. I mean, we're just such a wonderful partnership. And he, very, very early on, it was very clear to me that the best way to tell this movie was as if my father was the director, not me. If my father was a cinematographer, not me. If my father designed the costumes, because ultimately he would tell the most fabulous version of those stories. Once we took that premise, that we're really seeing this film through the purpose, because ultimately, because you've seen the film, you know how it ends, it is ultimately a guy wrestling with the sum of his life. And therefore, he's offering up, but this happened and this happened in the way that he remembers it.
Right.
And very early on, Byron and I looked at that. So that means when it's dark, it's the darkest dark there ever was. When it's light, it's the lightest light there ever was. When it's blue, it's the bluest blue. When it's loud, it's the loudest loud. And once we took that kind of approach, the color and the tapestry of the picture really came into incredible clarity for us. And every scene just really started with, what does he want us to see? What does he not want us to see in this moment? And how do we serve that vision? And that really became the compass for Byron and I. And yes, and Byron's work was just really breathtaking.
I love the fluidity of the camera with this. It has the same fluidity as the music almost. And
well, I don't know if Byron told you this. We always thought that was really important. And early on, this was Byron's idea, the idea that we would give all the crew, the focus pullers, everybody who could, the yapper, the key grip, we would give them headphones. And even if the scene didn't have music in it, we would choose music that felt like it might have been playing around that time. So from the moment people came on the set every day, there was music playing. The crew was constantly being moved by the motion and the rhythm of that music. And we absolutely believe that informed the way the film ultimately looked.
I totally...
The crane operator listened to these songs as they were moving the crane, and it really mattered.
I totally agree, because you feel it. If you're looking for it just to point out camera movement, you can see some of the fluidity and some of the camera angles that are chosen, but you really feel it in tandem with the music. And I just think that is a spectacular way for this film to be presented. Now, I love the use of red. I love how you use the red wash. I mean, the metaphor there of how he sees things, it gets a wash and a red glow, but that also equates to everything he does is a gamble. Everything he does is a risk. It's red, stop.
Yep.
And I love a lot of the metaphor that you have inserted and integrated within this film. It just adds, it elevates the film to another level, Tim.
Oh, thank you.
Just absolutely amazing. Now, I'm curious here. How challenging was the editing of this film?
So challenging. It was so challenging. It was the hardest thing by far in the 30 plus years I've been doing this stuff for me to edit. And in large part because we always knew we were bouncing around in time, but ultimately, what did the audience need to start investing in this guy they have absolutely no knowledge about? And we changed the structure editorially a number of times. I did, which I like doing. I know some filmmakers don't. I did an audience test screening so early. I did it maybe 4 weeks after wrap, just to test the basic construct of were people following just the basic storyline, and the answer was they were not. We got that loud and clear, and we had opened in a different way in Buddha. And there was too much information being thrown around. So we very early on realized that playing with the structure was going to be crucial. And because we did the film independently, we were blessed with the ability to do it on our own timeline. And so one of the things I think is probably the greatest asset to the film is we kept taking breaks and walking away from it. You know, there was a period where we would just stop for a second and wait 4 weeks and literally not look at a frame and then come back. And that was so informative to be able to give it some time to ultimately reveal itself to us. How we use music to drive the narrative of it was so important, but one song could overlay 6 or 7 different scenes if we did it correctly. So I work with this extraordinary editor, Derek Ambrosi, who I'd never worked with before, and he just brought such a level of artistry and an understanding of music. And I would say so much of the editorial pacing is very much a result of his extraordinary gifts.
You have some incredible montages happening in here. And as you say, the scenes one song could overlap 6 or 7 situations. The Beth concert scene is beautiful. It's ethereal. It's stunning. You've got the bad girls into Dim All the Lights, right into the Hollywood Bowl concert with the behind the scenes, on the stage, distance. I mean, just absolutely stunning montages, and I'm a big montage fan. I love the old Busby Berkeley's with montages and geometry, and so I was just in little piggy heaven with a lot of this here, Tim.
And you know, and to that, what you do think came out at the end, and it sounds like you felt this as well, the montages did always seem to drive the story, though,
yes,
pretty significantly. I mean, I love the Gladys Knight Midnight Train to Georgia sequence where we are transporting him. That song metaphorically and actually transported him from his New York life to his Los Angeles life. And ultimately, in that scene, we physically transport him from New York to Los Angeles. We physically transport him from one woman to the other woman. So it was so important that the song gave us the vehicle to drive so much more story than perhaps normally would be the case. It's also the case, we have so many scenes, I forget how many, there's so many scenes in this movie, and the only reason they fit is because of the construct with the music, I think.
I agree. And then piggybacking on that is you have Justin Gray, who's doing a score that underlies all of the needle drops. And then I have to give kudos, your sound people did, with the sound mix and edit, did a beautiful job so that we hear the songs, we hear score. There's wonderful soft edits in the mix that take us from one thing into another. Dialogue is never obscured.
Justin Gray, who I've worked with for many, many years, but this certainly was, the biggest thing that we've done together. And Justin also worked with my youngest baby brother, Evan, and the two of them did the score. And early on, there was that great challenge of how do you put a score in the middle of a movie with all these incredibly important songs? And the premise was it all has to feel like it's one thing. And the score has to feel like it's part of the needle drops, and the needle drops have to then become score. And so that architecturally was a decision early on, even in the writing. But what Justin and Evan were able to do in composing that score just fulfilled every one of those hopes. And then, yes, the mix done by wonderful mixer from Los Angeles, Brian Berger, was just fabulous. And for an independent movie, we did about 20 days. I mean, this was a very important thing, the soundscape of this film. So we really knocked ourselves out on the mix, and it certainly shows, I think.
Oh,
the work we did is one.
It definitely does. And of course, this is where your casting is also so important, because you've got to have people that can sell these songs that are being portrayed and presented to us. I mean, you talk about Tayla Parx as
and not just the song. You know, Tayla hasn't done a whole lot acting-wise. I think what an incredibly courageous performance she gives.
Yeah.
She just totally comes and plays, and it's just extraordinary what she does. Ledisi had not done much from acting, and boy, she slayed it. And Jason Derulo was some of my favorite scenes in the film. I mean, he knocks it out of the park with those scenes. I love those Ron Isley scenes. So I do think that the music artist, very important early on too, and I know some people will disagree with this when they see the film. I never wanted this film to be mimicry. I didn't want to mimic the 60s. I didn't want to mimic the 70s. And I did not want to mimic Donna Summer. I didn't want to mimic Kiss. I wanted people who had the essence of who these people were. And then my bet was the audience will enjoy who these humans are, not because they look exactly like Donna Summer or that person is exactly like Gene Simmons or exactly like Ron Isley. But if you're going to cast the current Ron Isley was a revolutionary act. Was bold, broke boundaries. That's Jason Derulo. So I looked at the essence of who these people were, really without any concern what they look like, knowing that sometimes we do get pushback on that. And I'm so thrilled with those choices.
Casting is just impeccable. Granted, a film like Bohemian Rhapsody, Rami Malek transformed into Freddie Mercury.
Sure.
There is no doubt about it. Just like Quillam Lee, a dead ringer for Brian May at that point in time. But here, there's enough of an essence. It's the essence. And with the costuming and wigs, you believe, because it's also, we're more concerned with the sound. As these people get introduced and we start hearing them, and it's what they brought, it's the sound that your dad brought and elicited from them and created. And that's more driving than a mimicry.
And I think part of that, is the decision also was we weren't casting Gene Simmons because Gene Simmons was a character.
Yep.
We were casting Chaim Witz. So Casey Likes playing Chaim Witz, I wasn't casting Gene Simmons. I was casting the guy underneath that. And I wasn't casting Donna Summer. I was casting LaDonna Gaines. And so in each one of those instances, I was looking for it to be a slight turn left or right from what the normal expectation was. And frankly, we were doing the same with the music. Very important decision early on. You can't beat Bill Withers' Lean On Me Master. You can't beat it. You shouldn't try to beat it. I wanted to know what it sounded like the first time he ever sang it. We were looking to do the first drafts of music history. And once you do that, you're able to open it up to the imperfections, to the evolution, and it gave our actors who portrayed these artists the opportunity to truly make it their own without claiming that that was the final version. Because we didn't show the final versions, we showed the journey on the way, which was really what these characters were celebrating is how is music created by music lovers? What is that journey, and what are the sacrifices that are required to do so? Not let's just hear another, the same version of Midnight Train to Brooklyn we've heard 100 times, although it's spectacular. I wanted to look through a different lens.
Well, you certainly achieved that. I found the Kiss sequences particularly effective because everybody has such, and by the way, I bought their original single when nobody was buying it. And I have it. So, but to see the rawness that you brought out, and the greatest transformation is LaDonna Gaines into Donna Summer. We see the shy girl, the trepidation. She's frustrated. I've been down this road before. It's not going to work. Nobody buys the record. We see all that, and that's really that's part of the meat and potatoes of this film, is that journey.
Well, and as you mentioned Kiss, I think that's really a thing that I knew in the beginning. I always thought Kiss would be where potentially we just fall down, because it's so easy to look at them as a joke. But they're performing 40 years later. There's nothing joking about this band. Nobody worked harder than them in their day, and nobody works harder than them today. So the idea that you could easily fall into the mimicry of that was always concerning. We wanted to embrace the rawness and the commitment these guys had to their music, which was absolutely true and profound. You don't look at 40 years without it. The other thing I knew we kind of, interestingly for the crazy rabid Kiss fans, and I've seen some of this already online, that's not the makeup or that's not the logo. And it's not about whether we had the rights to use it. This movie takes place from 1974 to 1977. They were figuring it out. We went through great pains early on working with Gene and working with Paul and working with Peter to see what their makeup looked like before they figured it out. And that's what we were paying homage to. It was the creation of history, not the end result of it. So, it was an interesting choice, and I know we've got some people going, that's not right. But it actually was absolutely right. If you were at that concert at Cobo Arena that year, that's what it looked like. And that's so much about that journey that we were trying to capture. And hopefully people will see it for that.
And I love that you mentioned Gene's involvement, Paul's involvement, because Gene Simmons, if anybody has ever followed him or listened to many interviews he's given over the decades, he talks about the early days and finding themselves.
Absolutely. And early, actually really, really, really early, Gene was even going to be involved producing for a while. And so, he spent a lot of time with me telling me, stories that didn't yet make it at that point into the different biographies and the different books that they would do. And when we started the design of the film, Dean and Paul were in contact with our costume designers and our makeup designers and the people who created, the guitar that Paul used in that opening scene at the Century Plaza. So they were very extraordinarily helpful and wanted to see it done right. They had a great affinity for my father and what he meant to them, and I was blessed with their this wonderful support along the way.
I have to ask about Jeremy Jordan. You got to save the best for last.
And boy, is he the best. I will tell you, different than anything I've ever cast, I kept casting everybody else. I cast Cecil. I cast Frankie Crocker. I cast Ron Isley. I could not cast the person who played my father. And I was actually on the verge, because we finally put together the whole cast. I was ready to make the film. I still hadn't identified who would play my father. Not surprising. That was a tough nut for me to find. And I was about to cast a rather well-known actor who I'm sure would have been lovely. And I had my cold feet the morning we were about to sort of close the deal. And I called Larry Mark, who's a producer on the film, and I said, Larry, the end monologue, which is so important, this guy says, you all know Donna, George Clinton, Village People, but not one of you knows me. And I thought that was so important that this audience not know this person if we were going to take them on a journey to discover who this person was. And in a crazy last-minute move, I said, who's the greatest showman on Broadway right now? Because my father ultimately was a showman. And Larry Mark just said, Jeremy Jordan. I had never heard of Jeremy Jordan. I went on YouTube that night. I spent about 6 hours going down a rabbit hole of one extraordinary performance after the other. I jumped on a red eye the next night to get to New York, demanded that he meet with me through his agents. He hadn't done anything remotely like this in film, but I just saw in him so much of the showman that I thought my father was, and it was absolutely the most important and successful creative choice of my career.
He's brilliant. His performance is Oscar-worthy, I got to tell you.
I agree. I think he's an absolutely remarkable talent.
And I just have to say thank you very much for the Last Dance production number. Louis B. Mayer is smiling down from the heavens with that one. That is so Hollywood. That is so a musical at its finest. Just fabulous.
Oh, thank you so much.
Tim, thank you so much. This has been an absolute joy to get to speak with you about a film that I am so in love with. It's not even funny. It's spectacular. I hope we get to chat again in the future about your upcoming projects.
Absolutely.